A millionaire disguises himself as a beggar and goes to a luxury car dealership. What happens at the end will completely surprise you. Jonathan Brooks, disguised as a beggar, sat on a weathered wooden bench strategically positioned in front of the Royce Bentley Motors dealership. The London sun shone brightly, reflecting off the luxurious cars displayed in the showroom. He watched the dance of wealth with a distant gaze, reminiscing about the life he once shared with his wife. The faces of passers-by blurred into insignificance, each person so focused on their own ambitions that they seemed to overlook his presence. The roar of powerful engines and animated conversations filled the air, but Jonathan was lost in his memories. "Oh, how I wish you were here, Clara," he murmured to himself as a gleaming Bentley Continental GT caught the eye of a well-dressed couple. "You always said that true wealth lies in the little things," he sighed, feeling the weight of loneliness and anguish. It was as if the exterior shine of the cars reflected the superficiality of the world around him, a world he had left behind, but was now irresistibly drawn back to. Inside the dealership, the atmosphere was marked by fierce competition. Tom Williams, an ambitious salesman, was boasting about his latest achievement to a colleague. "I managed to close the sale on the new model to that businessman in the city. He didn't even know what he was paying for, but who cares? The important thing is that I got the cheese and left the rat out," Tom said, laughing arrogantly. His gaze was condescending as he turned to a simple-looking customer who had just entered. "Do you really think you can buy a car here? What are you doing in this place? Come on, I'll show you to the door," he jabbed with a sarcastic smile. Sarah Bennett, the dealership manager, was nearby and couldn't help but overhear the conversation. Her heart ached at the sight of Tom treating the customer this way. "Tom, you can't talk like that. Everyone deserves respect, no matter what they can or cannot buy," she intervened, her voice heavy with concern. "Oh, Sarah, with your moral lessons," Tom replied, rolling his eyes. "We're here to sell, not to make friends. If you can't see that, maybe you should rethink your position." He walked away, ignoring Sarah's disappointed expression. She felt a wave of frustration and sadness knowing that the dealership's culture was becoming increasingly toxic. Rupert Townsend, the owner of Royce Bentley, watched the scene from his office, silent and reflective. He had built his career on hard work and integrity, but now he saw his values being challenged. "What is happening to this company?" he pondered, as he observed Tom's despicable attitude. "Maybe it's time to change something. Whatever happened to respect and humanity?" The concern on his face grew more evident as he contemplated the future of the dealership and the direction it was taking. Jonathan, still on his bench, observed everything with a critical eye. He questioned what true success really meant. These men and women, they've lost sight of what truly matters, he thought, shaking his head in disapproval. What's worth more, a luxury car or a person's dignity? He felt increasingly determined to understand what was needed to restore human values in a world so obsessed with appearances and wealth. Meanwhile, the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the dealership. Jonathan knew that his journey was just beginning, but with each passing day, the need for change became clearer. He was ready to explore the depths of the human soul, even if it meant confronting his own pain and insecurities. Sarah Bennett sat at her desk, surrounded by the shine of luxury cars that glimmered under the artificial lights of Royce Bentley Motors. With a distant look, she watched the frenetic activity around her. The sound of powerful engines and jingling car keys felt far away, almost like an echo of a life she barely recognized. Her mind was elsewhere, thinking of her son, who had called her not long ago, his small, sad voice echoing in her head. "Mom, when are you coming home? I miss you," he had said, and guilt washed over her. Sarah had promised she would return soon, but Rupert's summons for an important meeting still kept her there. She took a deep breath, trying to focus on her work, but the feeling of being torn between her responsibilities and her personal life weighed heavily on her shoulders. "Sarah, are you okay?" Tom Williams's voice interrupted her thoughts. He stood beside her, wearing the arrogant smile she knew all too well. "You look like you're on another planet. How about joining me for a coffee? I have some impressive sales to share." She looked at him, a mix of fatigue and irritation crossing her face. "I'm fine, Tom, just thinking about some things." "Thinking? Ha! You should be thinking about how to make more sales. Look at those cars." He pointed to the displayed models, his expression full of disdain as he noticed a customer who seemed unable to afford a car. "That kind shouldn't be here. What's he doing in our dealership?" "Tom, that's not right," Sarah said, trying to stay calm. "Everyone has the right to dream. even if they can't achieve it right now. Dreaming, don't make me laugh. What matters is closing deals and making money, Tom replied, his voice rising. If you're not willing to do what it takes, maybe you should rethink your position here. Sarah felt a wave of indignation but held back. She knew the environment around her was becoming toxic, and Tom's lack of empathy only reinforced her decision to not get swept away by that culture. You need to learn to have more respect for people, Tom. Success isn't just about sales. It's about how we treat others. You're dreaming, Sarah. The world is a tough place, and you need to be tough too, he retorted, turning to join another colleague in a corner of the room, leaving her alone again. Sarah sighed, looking out the window at the beggar sitting on a bench in front of the dealership. He watched the luxury cars with a distant gaze, as if he were in a completely different world. There was something about him that intrigued her. She stood up, deciding that a little fresh air would do her good. When she stepped outside, the beggar noticed her. "It's not an easy place, is it?" he commented, his voice raspy. "No, it's not," Sarah replied, a bit surprised by the depth of the exchange. "But perhaps what truly matters is not what we have, but how we treat each other." The man smiled faintly, a smile that seemed to conceal a deeper wisdom. "You are a good woman. Don't let the shine of the cars overshadow what really matters." Before she could respond, he walked away, and Sarah found herself reflecting on the simplicity of his words. Upon returning to the dealership, she encountered Tom, who was watching her with a possessive gaze. "Look at that. The people's woman chatting with a homeless guy," he commented sarcastically. "Shouldn't you be more concerned about selling cars instead of wasting time with him?" "Maybe you should try a little empathy, Tom," she replied, her voice firm. "One day you might need someone to treat you with humanity." Tom rolled his eyes, but something in his expression indicated that her words bothered him. Sarah decided not to let it get to her. She had a son to care for and a job that needed to be done. The day was not over yet, and she was determined to make a difference, even if it was small, within that dealership. Tom Williams observed the frenetic activity at Royce Bentley Motors, but his mind was far from that luxury environment. He recalled his childhood, the days when his family struggled to put food on the table, the image of his mother, her face etched with fatigue, and his father, always worried about bills that just kept coming, haunted his thoughts. Those times shaped him, and the promise he made to himself, to never go through that again, drove him in an unrelenting quest for success. Amid the noise of engines and the smell of new leather cars, Tom isolated himself in his thoughts, recalling a specific scene. "We can't buy sliced bread, Tom. We'll have to eat what's left of the soup," his mother had said with a forced smile. Young Tom, just 8 years old, had decided that poverty would not be his fate. He stood up from the floor, determined. "One day, I'll have everything. I'll have the most beautiful car and money will never be a worry," he promised himself, his voice thick with emotion. The thought led him to observe the clients entering the dealership, the ostentation of their clothes and the arrogance in their gazes. "Look at this," he murmured to himself, watching a customer who could barely disguise his contempt for a less fortunate salesperson. "They don't even know what it means to fight for a dream." Fury built up inside him. He wanted to be one of them, someone who didn't have to worry about what they had or didn't have. Meanwhile, Sarah Bennett, the dealership manager, was in her office, struggling to balance her professional and personal life. The phone rang, and her son's voice echoed from the other end. "Mom, are you coming home today?" The sadness in his voice hit her hard. "Yes, sweetheart, I promise I will. Just one more meeting," she replied, trying to suppress the guilt that consumed her. She looked out the window and saw Jonathan, the homeless man who had caught her attention in recent days. There was something intriguing about him, but she couldn't afford to be distracted. Work demanded her focus, and her personal life always came second. Meanwhile, Tom couldn't ignore the connection forming between Sarah and Jonathan. The idea of a homeless man capturing her attention irritated him deeply. Who does he think he is? He thought, jealousy seeping into his actions. He decided he needed to prove that he was better than that man. "She needs someone who can offer more than just words," he murmured to himself, disdain evident in his tone. That night, Jonathan, still disguised, walked through London, reflecting on what he had witnessed that afternoon. He had seen Tom humiliate a customer, a moment that left him profoundly unsettled. The middle-aged man had looked visibly embarrassed upon entering, and Tom, instead of offering help, laughed at him. "Sorry, sir, but this place isn't for you," he had said with a sarcastic smile. Jonathan felt a wave of indignation. That's not success, that's contempt, he thought as he walked through the cold streets, his heart heavy. Thinking of his wife, Jonathan remembered how she always taught him to respect others, regardless of their circumstances. True wealth lies in how we treat others, she used to say. Now observing the superficiality surrounding him, he wondered, what does success really mean? Is it having money and luxury cars? Or is it actually how we connect with the people around us? These reflections led him to a moment of determination. He knew that change needed to start somewhere, and who better to begin that transformation than himself, in a world that seemed so lost in appearances. With a new purpose, Jonathan decided he could no longer just be an observer. It was time to act, to show the true essence of human value, even if it meant revealing his identity to Sarah and confronting Tom directly. Jonathan Brooks, still disguised as a homeless man, resolved to get closer to Sarah Bennett. He understood that the dealership manager was someone carrying a weight greater than she appeared to. In a nearby cafe, Rupert Townsend, the owner of the dealership, was on one of his coffee breaks, reflecting on the changes necessary for the company. Spotting Jonathan sitting at the next table, Rupert remembered how the man had caught his attention with his silent and observant presence. "You look lost in thought," Rupert commented, pulling up a chair and sitting across from Jonathan. The tech mogul looked at Rupert surprised but did not change his expression of serenity. "I'm just observing the world around me," Jonathan replied, a slight smile on his lips. "Sometimes the best way to understand people is to stay silent and listen." Rupert nodded, intrigued. "You're right. The time I spent in the tech sector taught me that, but it also taught me that often people are more concerned with displaying their accomplishments than genuinely connecting with one another." Jonathan seized the opportunity and began sharing his reflections on the superficiality he had witnessed at the dealership. "I saw it in the way Tom treats customers. He sees them as numbers, not as people." Rupert's expression grew serious. "That's what worries. The culture of our dealership is becoming toxic. We need to change that, but I don't know where to start." "Maybe it starts with you," Jonathan suggested, with a deep look. "You have the power to influence those around you. If you show that you value empathy, others will follow your lead." Meanwhile, Sarah was inside the dealership, trying to cope with the pressure from her boss and the absence of her son. She felt torn, and guilt consumed her. When her phone rang, her son's anxious voice came through. "Mom, are you coming home today? I miss you." "Of course, sweetheart. I promise I'll do my best to be there," she replied, trying to hide the weariness in her voice. But deep down, she knew her dedication to work was pulling her away from her child. Soon Rupert entered the dealership, and Sarah noticed he looked visibly pensive. Before she could approach him, he walked over with a serious look on his face. "Sarah, can we talk for a moment?" "Sure, Rupert, what happened?" Sarah asked, feeling a slight chill in her stomach. "I'm concerned about the culture we're fostering here. We need to find a balance. I see you care about the team, and that's something I want to expand," Rupert said. Sarah nodded, but doubt flickered in her eyes. "I want to help, but Tom, he doesn't take criticism well. He needs to be challenged, but I'm not sure how to do that without causing a rift." Rupert sighed. "I'm going to need your help to bring about the change we need. If you can team up with Jonathan, maybe we can turn this situation around." Intrigued, Sarah remembered her brief interaction with Jonathan the day before. "Do you really think he can be part of the solution? He's different. He's more than he seems," Rupert replied, a reassuring smile on his face. "Sometimes we need to look beyond appearances to find people's true value." Sarah felt a spark of hope. "If Jonathan can really help, I'll stand with him." That night, as the city of London was bathed in nightlights, Jonathan decided it was time to reveal himself. He had observed Sarah long enough to realize she was someone who could understand his vision about life and work. So he arranged a meeting with her to discuss his observations and the culture at the dealership. The next day, Jonathan met Sarah at a quiet cafe, away from the hustle and bustle of the dealership. When she arrived, he stood up, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "Hi, Sarah, thanks for coming." "Hi, Jonathan. What did you want to discuss?" she asked, a bit nervous but curious. "I want you to know that although I have been disguised, my intention was to observe how people really behave, and what I saw made me hopeful about the possibility of change. You are one of the few people here who truly cares." Sarah was taken aback by his sincerity. "I appreciate that, but what do you really want? What are you hoping for from this conversation?" "I want to discuss how we can improve the culture at Royce Bentley Motors. I want to join forces with you and Rupert to create an environment where people feel respected and valued, Jonathan replied, his voice filled with determination. Do you really believe that's possible? She asked, her eyes fixed on his. Yes, I believe, but we will need courage and a little boldness to change things, and I want you to be part of this. I'm in, Sarah said, feeling energized. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to try. And so their conversation deepened, paving the way for a new dynamic that could transform not only the dealership, but also Sarah's life and, perhaps, even Tom's. Jonathan and Sarah were in a nearby park, the sun beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The mild weather provided a moment of tranquility amid the frenzy of urban life. Jonathan looked at Sarah, the woman he had admired and respected. His heart raced. It was time to reveal his true identity. Sarah, he began, his voice a bit shaky. There's something I need to tell you. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and apprehension. What is it, Jonathan? You seem serious. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. Actually, I'm not just a homeless man. My name is Jonathan Brooks, and I'm the owner of Royce Bentley Motors. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. What? You're kidding, right? She shook her head, trying to process the information. You can't be. I am, he said, a faint, sad smile on his face. I came to the dealership in disguise to better understand what's going on there, to see how people really behave. And honestly, I needed a new perspective on life after my wife passed away. Sarah fell silent, trying to digest his words. The image of the homeless man she had met now mingled with that of a mogul, someone who had everything, yet was also searching for something deeper. But why didn't you introduce yourself before? You could have made a difference in there. Because I wanted to see people's true essence, Jonathan replied, his gaze drifting into the distance. I wanted to understand what success really means, and what I saw worried me. People fighting for status and money, forgetting what truly matters. Sarah felt her heart tighten. I don't know what to say. This is a lot to process. I don't expect you to believe me right away, he said, raising his hand as if to prevent her from feeling pressured. But I want you to know that I admire your work and your commitment. You are one of the few people who still cares about others in that place. Thank you, Jonathan, she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. But what about Tom? He's not going to like this. I know, Jonathan affirmed, his tone becoming more serious. But that's why I need your help. I want you to join me for a ride in one of the dealership's cars. We can talk more about this. Sarah hesitated, the idea of getting into a luxury car feeling surreal. A ride? You want me to go with you in a car that costs more than I earn in a year? Yes, he smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face. And don't worry about the price. That's not what matters. What matters is the conversation we'll have. She looked at him, and in that moment something inside her ignited. Okay, I'll go. But that doesn't mean I fully trust you yet. I understand, and I respect that, Jonathan said, relieved. He extended his hand as if to seal an agreement. Sarah hesitated but finally shook his hand, feeling a connection that transcended the superficiality of the world they lived in. Let's see where this takes us. With a nod, Jonathan led her back to the dealership. The car he chose was a masterpiece, a model that gleamed under the last rays of sunlight. As they entered, the aroma of leather and cutting-edge technology enveloped them, making Sarah feel like she was in a completely different world. While driving, Jonathan began to share his experiences and what led him to disguise himself. Life is about more than wealth and material possessions, Sarah. It's about human connections, empathy, and love. She looked out the window, watching the city lights begin to glow. But how can we change that? The atmosphere at the dealership is so toxic. We need to start with small changes, Jonathan said, passion in his voice. And I want you to be a part of it. I believe you can be the key to transforming that place. Sarah felt a wave of responsibility wash over her. If I can help, I will. But it won't be easy. I don't expect it to be, Jonathan replied, determined. But together we can try. In that moment, something shifted within Sarah. The idea of a new beginning, not just for herself but for everyone around her, began to take shape. And as she looked at Jonathan, she saw not just a magnate seeking redemption, but a man willing to fight for values that truly mattered. Sarah was sitting on one of the benches in the park near the dealership, a gentle breeze lightly swaying her hair. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, but her mind was far from the beauty of the moment. She glanced at her phone, the message from her son still echoing in her mind. "Mom, are you coming home today?" The promise to return to him weighed heavy on her heart and guilt consumed her. "Why can't I balance this?" she thought, biting her lower lip. Work had become a burden, and the pressure to succeed at the dealership was immense. At the same time, she wished her son could understand that she was doing this for him, for a better future. However, the image of his sad little face when he called her made her question her priorities. Jonathan, still disguised as a beggar, observed Sarah from a distance. He always saw her so focused, but now he noticed the fragility in her gaze. He approached slowly, feeling the need to speak with her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft yet raspy. Sarah turned, surprised to see a man so out of place in the luxurious setting. "Do you need something?" she asked, a mixture of concern and curiosity in her voice. "Actually, I just wanted to say that I admire your work. It's easy to forget that there are people behind the numbers and sales," he replied, a slight smile on his lips. Sarah was intrigued. "Thank you. It's strange to hear that from someone who seems to be in a tough situation," she said, gesturing slightly to his simple attire. "Sometimes appearances can be deceiving," Jonathan retorted, his gaze steady. "Life teaches us that what truly matters isn't what we have, but who we are and how we treat others." She reflected on those words, feeling an unexpected connection with this man. "You spoke like someone who's been through a lot," she commented, crossing her arms. "What do you mean by that?" Jonathan hesitated but decided to share a bit of his story, albeit superficially. "I lost the person I loved most. Since then, I've been trying to understand what really matters in life. Sometimes it seems like all this shine and wealth are just a facade. I understand. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing sight of what truly matters," Sarah admitted, her voice trembling. "My son, he misses me and I'm always so busy. It's easy to get lost in this game of success, but the true victory is finding balance," Jonathan suggested, his eyes reflecting a wisdom that came from pain. As they talked, Tom, who was watching from afar, began to feel threatened. He didn't like how Sarah was engaging with that man. "What's that beggar doing here?" he muttered to himself. "He has nothing to offer, and she's getting distracted." Determined to assert his value, Tom approached. "Hey Sarah, I was looking for you. We need to talk about tomorrow's meeting," he said, trying to interrupt the conversation. "Not now, Tom. I'm having a conversation," Sarah replied, a bit irritated. Tom looked at Jonathan with disdain. "And you are? A street counselor? Why don't you go back to where you came from?" he shot back, his tone sharp. Jonathan, remaining calm, countered, "Sometimes the best perspective comes from those who aren't trapped in expectations. Success can be a prison." Sarah looked back and forth between the two, feeling the tension rise. "Tom, this isn't necessary," she said, trying to de-escalate the situation. But Tom was determined to assert his position. "You need to understand that you can't trust just anyone. He doesn't belong in our world," Tom insisted, his voice growing louder. Jonathan, sensing the situation intensifying, decided it was time to walk away. "Sorry, Sarah, I didn't mean to create problems. I just thought the conversation would be helpful." "Wait," Sarah called, but he was already walking away. As he left, he felt a mix of helplessness and determination. He knew he needed to act, not just for himself, but also for Sarah and her son. Tom turned to Sarah, an arrogant smile on his lips. "Come on, we have a meeting. Don't let him influence you." "Maybe I need to think a little more about this, Tom," Sarah replied, her mind spinning. Jonathan's words echoed in her head, and she realized she was at a turning point in her life. Meanwhile, Jonathan walked away, reflecting on the impact his presence could have on Sarah's life. He was determined to stay away, but he knew that change was just beginning. Jonathan found himself at a crossroads. After being accused of fraud by Tom, he found himself in an agonizing situation. The buzz at the dealership was palpable. The suspicious glances from employees and the hurried pace of clients increased the pressure on his shoulders. He knew he had to act quickly to clear his name and, more importantly, to protect what was most valuable in his life, his principles. "I won't let him destroy me," Jonathan whispered to himself as he prepared for a direct confrontation with Tom, who was waiting for him in a meeting room. The atmosphere was tense, almost electric. Jonathan took a deep breath, remembering his wife and the legacy she left behind. He couldn't let Tom's unchecked ambition bring him down. Tom stood by the table, a cynical smile on his lips. Ah, if it isn't London's richest beggar, he mocked, crossing his arms. Do you really think you can hide behind a mask of kindness and still get away with it? The truth always comes to light, Jonathan. You don't belong in this world. Jonathan felt a wave of indignation but maintained his composure. Tom, you not only underestimate me but also everyone here. What you did was dishonorable and frankly pathetic. If you have something to say it in front of everyone. Don't take advantage of others to achieve your goals. The door opened, and Sarah entered with a determined look. What's going on here? She asked, her tone firm. I heard rumors that Jonathan is being accused. This is unacceptable. She looked at Tom, who was trying to appear unconcerned, but the tension in his body was evident. He's an imposter, Sarah, Tom exclaimed, unable to contain his anger. He's not who he says he is. Don't be fooled by this facade of kindness. There's a side of him you don't know. And what's your side, Tom? Sarah replied, crossing her arms. The one that feels superior to everyone, that takes advantage of those who are vulnerable? You're no better than Jonathan, even if you try to convince them otherwise. Jonathan watched the confrontation between Sarah and Tom, his heart warming with the defense she was offering. He knew he needed to seize this opportunity. Sarah, you know my work. You know my intentions are genuine. The life I lead now reflects what I learned after losing my wife. I'm here to bring change, not to cause trouble. Tom interrupted, laughing sarcastically. Change? What do you know about change, Jonathan? The only thing you've brought here is your emotional baggage. There's no use hiding behind sad stories to justify your presence. Enough, Tom, Sarah shouted, her voice resonating in the room. This isn't about you or Jonathan. It's about what we want for Royce Bentley. We need integrity and respect, not petty rivalries. Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling that it was time to expose himself. Tom, if you think bringing me down will make you better, you're mistaken. I'm not a rival. I want everyone here to thrive. What you say is just a mask for your insecurities, but I won't fight for that. I'll simply live my truth. Tom, visibly frustrated, glared at Jonathan with disdain. You'll regret this. I'll do whatever it takes to bring you down. Jonathan, resolute, replied, You can try, but you won't succeed. The truth always prevails, and that's something you still don't understand. At that moment, Rupert entered the office, sensing the tension in the air. He looked at Jonathan and then at Tom, his expression serious. What's going on here? He asked, his voice firm and authoritative. Jonathan is trying to pass himself off as someone he's not. Tom shot back, his tone laced with venom. Rupert shook his head. Let's clarify this now. All of you, to the meeting room. We need to discuss this as a team. Jonathan felt a mix of relief and anxiety. This was the opportunity he needed to defend himself and expose the truth. He knew that with Sarah's support and Rupert's leadership, he could face the storm that Tom had created. What was at stake was not just his reputation, but the very essence of what the dealership should represent. The atmosphere in the meeting room was tense. All eyes turned to Jonathan as he prepared to speak. He knew his reputation was on the line, and that he needed to demonstrate his character to the dealership team. With a folder in hand, he stood up and took a deep breath, seeking the courage he had gathered during his journey as a homeless man. Good morning, everyone. Jonathan began, his voice firm and clear. I'm here not just to defend myself, but to show who I really am. I'm not just a rich man seeking status. I'm someone who learned to value the true essence of life after losing the person I loved most. He paused, observing the reactions around him. Some employees looked curious, others still skeptical. He opened the folder and began displaying documents. Here are proofs of my donations to charities. This is a project I've supported for years, a shelter for victims of domestic violence. And this is another that helps underprivileged youth obtain education and opportunities. Jonathan flipped through the pages, showing photos and testimonials of transformed lives. I believe that true success is not in what we have, but in what we do for others. Sarah, who was standing next to Rupert, felt a wave of emotion as she listened to Jonathan's words. She realized that behind the facade of wealth and power was a man who genuinely cared about people. This is amazing, Jonathan, she said, her voice filled with sincerity. You're making a real difference in people's lives. Tom, sitting at the back of the room, squirmed in his seat. He couldn't let the truth about Jonathan spread, and his instinct for survival drove him to act. This is all very nice, but who guarantees that this isn't just a ploy to clean up your image? He shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Maybe you just made those donations to look like a good Samaritan while living a life of excess. Jonathan didn't let himself be shaken. Tom, what I do or don't do doesn't define my character. I'm not here to compete with you in terms of sales or ostentation. I'm here to show that true value lies in being human, in sharing, in caring for others regardless of what we possess. Rupert, observing the dynamics, decided to intervene. Tom, you need to understand that the culture we create here cannot be based on selfishness and unfair competition. We need empathy and respect. We can't continue like this. Tom, realizing he was losing support, tried to change tactics. But what if he's just trying to manipulate us? He showed up out of nowhere, and now everyone wants to believe his emotional stories. This is a game, and you're all falling for it. Sarah didn't hesitate to stand by Jonathan. I've known Jonathan for a short time, but what I've seen is a man who genuinely cares. He doesn't need a luxury car or a title of magnate to be respectable. He's here to help us see what really matters. The room fell silent for a moment, as if everyone were processing what Sarah had said. Jonathan smiled at her, grateful. What I'm proposing is not just a change of attitudes, but a change of mindset. We need to work together as a team, not just to sell cars, but to build relationships and create an environment where everyone feels valued. Tom felt the weight of Jonathan's and Sarah's words. He was losing the battle, and frustration was building inside him. What if this is all just a plan to bring me down? What if you're just trying to infiltrate here and take my place? He shouted, his voice echoing in the room. Jonathan, instead of succumbing to the provocation, looked directly into Tom's eyes. I'm not here to take your place, Tom. I'm here to show that we all have the power to change. True strength doesn't come from reckless ambition, but from mutual respect and understanding. It was at that moment that Rupert made the decision to act. Enough, Tom. This has gone on long enough. It's time for us to change the culture of this dealership. We can no longer tolerate the behavior you've been demonstrating. We need a fresh start, and that includes respect and humanity. The tension in the room began to dissipate, but the impact of Jonathan and Sarah's words still lingered in the air, like a promise of transformation. The future of the dealership was at stake, and everyone there knew they had reached a turning point. The atmosphere at Royce Bentley Motors was heavy. The employees, once so united in their pursuit of sales and recognition, were starting to drift apart. The climate of distrust and intrigue instigated by Tom was spreading like a stain of ink. Jonathan, now respected and admired by many, observed the change in behavior around him. The looks that were once full of admiration were becoming questioning, and he knew that Tom was at the center of it all. Tom, in his growing frustration, was determined to destabilize Jonathan. He approached a group of employees who had previously admired Jonathan. With a forced smile, he began his manipulation. "Do you really think he's everything they say?" he asked, his tone insinuating. "Just because he has a nice car and an appearance of success? I know the truth. He's nothing more than a charlatan hiding behind a mask." The employees exchanged glances, some hesitating, while others seemed to reflect on Tom's words. "But he cares about people." A young employee, Lisa, intervened. "He really cares about what happens here." "Cares? Or is he just trying to promote himself?" Tom retorted, his voice growing more intense. "He just wants you to like him so he can get what he wants. Can't you see that?" Meanwhile, Rupert, watching the scene from a distance, felt a tightness in his chest. He knew that the culture of the dealership was in ruins, and Tom's influence was toxic. He headed to his office, determined to take action. It was time to gather everyone and bring clarity to the situation. In the conference room, Rupert called all the employees together. The atmosphere was tense, and anticipation hung in the air. Jonathan entered, his expression serious, but resolute. He knew that Tom's battle against him was just beginning. Sarah, by his side, felt nervous but also hopeful that the truth would prevail. "Thank you all for being here," Rupert began, his voice steady. "Today we need to talk about what's happening within our team. Things have changed in a way we can no longer ignore." Tom was there, wearing a smug smile, but Rupert didn't let himself be intimidated. "Jonathan, do you have something to say?" he asked, looking directly at the magnate who was masquerading as a beggar. Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Yes, I do." He turned to the team, sincerity in his eyes. "I never wanted to be here to compete with you. I came to understand the culture of our company, and what I've seen concerns me. This place has potential, but we cannot forget what truly matters: respect and solidarity." Tom rolled his eyes, but Rupert interrupted him. "Let him speak, Tom," he said firmly. "We need to listen." Continuing, Jonathan spoke about his experiences and beliefs. Success isn't just about numbers and sales. It's about how we treat each other, how we build relationships, and how we help the community around us. I've been doing this quietly, but I don't want to be seen as an intruder. I want to be part of this team that values people. The atmosphere in the room began to shift. The employees' resistance was fading, and some started nodding in agreement, showing support. Lisa, who had defended Jonathan earlier, raised her hand. "I've always seen this in you, Jonathan. You care, and that makes a difference." Tom was losing control of the situation. Anger was building inside him as the employees began to rally around Jonathan. "This is nonsense," he shouted, his voice echoing in the room. "You're letting yourselves be swayed by a lie." Rupert, sensing Tom's fragility, decided to intervene again. "Tom, we can't continue like this. We need to change the culture of our dealership. Unchecked competition and manipulation are not what define us. It's time to come together and focus on what truly matters." Jonathan, hearing Rupert, realized that the change he desired was possible. He looked at Sarah, who offered him an encouraging smile, and knew that together they could transform that. "I commit to helping all of you grow and become not only better salespeople but better people," Jonathan declared sincerely. "I want everyone to feel valued here." Tom, increasingly isolated, felt the ground slip from beneath him. "You don't know what you're talking about," he murmured, but his voice no longer held the same strength. The meeting ended with a new sense of hope in the air. Rupert, observing Jonathan's determination and the growing support from Sarah and the other employees, knew that the dealership was about to enter a new era. The transformation had begun, and the light of empathy was finally starting to shine over Royce Bentley Motors. The environment in the dealership was tense. The glass walls reflected the sunlight, but the internal atmosphere felt opaque, laden with distrust and rivalry. Tom, increasingly isolated, sensed the walls closing in around him. He tried to manipulate the other employees against Jonathan, spreading rumors and distorting the truth. However, most of them were beginning to see the light Jonathan brought with him, recognizing his good intentions and character. In a corner of the conference room, Rupert watched the dynamics closely. He knew he needed to act swiftly. It was time to give new direction to the dealership, which included not only a change in leadership, but also a transformation of the internal culture. "We need an environment where respect and humanity are priorities," Rupert thought, deciding that the scheduled meeting would be the right moment to address this issue. Meanwhile, Tom, increasingly desperate, found an opportunity to try to destabilize Rupert. He approached the owner with a gloomy expression. "You know, Rupert, I have information that could ruin your reputation. Information that, if disclosed, could tarnish not only your name but the entire Royce Bentley Motors," Tom said, his voice laden with a veiled threat. Rupert remained calm, but the tension in his body was palpable. He looked Tom in the eye and firmly replied, "What are you insinuating, Tom? Do you really think you can intimidate me with that? What you have to offer isn't worth the risk of losing my integrity." Tom smiled, believing he had found Rupert's weakness. "You forget your past, Rupert, where you came from. People can be cruel. A small spark of information can turn into an uncontrollable fire." Rupert took a deep breath, feeling the pressure rise, but instead of backing down, he decided to open his heart. "Look, Tom, I'm not ashamed of my past. I grew up in a humble family where every penny was counted. I worked hard to get where I am. And if you think you can take me down with shadows from the past, you're very mistaken. That past has strengthened me, and I take pride in it." Tom hesitated, surprised by Rupert's vulnerability. He expected a confrontation but found someone willing to expose himself. "You don't understand, Rupert. People don't care about your struggles. They only see what you have now. And if they find out where you came from, it could change everything," Tom retorted, his anger surfacing. It was at that moment that Jonathan, who had been observing the exchange from afar, decided to intervene. He approached with a calm and resolute expression. "Tom, what you don't understand is that we all have a past. What truly matters is what we choose to do with it. You have the opportunity to change your story now." All eyes turned to Jonathan, and Rupert felt this was the right moment for a twist. Jonathan is right. We all have our weaknesses and mistakes, but that doesn't define who we are. Tom, you have a chance for redemption. Instead of trying to bring others down, why not try to build something for yourself? For a brief moment, Tom appeared vulnerable, but he soon straightened up, anger flaring back in his eyes. "And what do you suggest? That I become one of your charity projects? An example of kindness? That won't bring me success. Success is all that matters in this world. Jonathan, maintaining his serene tone, replied, "Success without respect and values isn't success, Tom. It's just a facade. You have the chance to learn that. I'm not here to take your place, but to show that there's a different path, a path where respect and humanity are more valuable than any luxury car." At that moment, the room fell silent. Tom was caught between anger and reflection. He knew he had a choice to make. Jonathan continued, "Life is about choices, Tom. You can continue down this path of destruction or opt for a new beginning. The choice is yours." Rupert, watching the scene unfold, felt a wave of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for Tom to redeem himself. But that would depend on his willingness to change. The atmosphere in the room was charged, but there was a possibility of transformation in the air. The question was, would Tom accept the challenge or lose himself in his own bitterness?